Only 90s web developers will remember this. Actually, this is an article from Zach Holman that was written 10 years ago. Almost 10 years. We're getting really close, a month away. You remember the blink tag and the marquee tag? These tags allowed you to add animation to your web pages in the 90s. You can animate just like having a marquee, a text scrolling across the screen. And then you could have a blink tag and then it would flicker the text on the screen. And it was not at all, it quickly became, the blink tag quickly went out of style. It was still even the marquee tag. You don't see this anymore. You don't see this style of animation all that often, especially if there's some interactive element involved. You can combine the two and have the screen blink and marquee at the same time. You were trailblazer if you had access to these tags and you knew about them and you implemented them. You were a great innovator. You were a 90s web developer if you did these things. Way before JavaScript, way before CSS, we didn't really have a way to do a whole lot with web browsing and the web browsing experience. It was mostly just a bunch of text. And we were wanting to sort of emulate the print with being able to lay out text and images in a variety of patterns that were very common to us in magazines and print. So it was very tricky, but there was this one by one GIF. The idea was that you would have this transparent pixel that would be able to allow you to shape the page in any sort of fashion that you wanted. What you could do is you'd simply place the one by one in an image tag, and then you would specify the number of pixels that you want to move elements around on the page. This allowed you to position elements anywhere on the page. You can combine a variety of these one by one pixels, so that way you can do amazing things. Like the demo that's here. It's like you can position it, and then you could also marquee the text. Of course, now we have CSS, and with CSS we can just do what we need to do without having to bother with implementing and embedding positional materials and how the data is presented. We could just use CSS for that now. But back in the day, you had to do it like this with the image tag. We also had another trick to help us position elements on an HTML page without having to use CSS or JavaScript. We were able to easily, well, not really easily, I'd say, but it is actually still a trick that's used today, is using and non-breakable space, NBSP. This allows you to add additional positioning to characters one space at a time, and the NB stands for non-breakable. So this means that it wouldn't do any word wrapping. You will still see this being used in various places even today. It was a lot more common back in the 90s because it was a very big difficult challenge to position text around the screen, and you needed to use it, even though in the late 90s we did see CSS be released in 1996, and even then it was still so new. We still had to use all these tricks and all these hacks to get our text to show up in the right spot. Like this, you could position the My Guest Book below and have it indented, sort of like an indentation. Yeah, I remember using this in the 90s. It's a very common requirement. I very often had to use non-breakable space here. It was reliable. It did what you needed to, and you can change the font size, so it allowed you to really control how that was being displayed on the screen. Definitely would have enough money to cover the monthly bills for AOL if we had a nickel every time. If we remember, in the 90s, HTML pages became a lot more advanced and powerful with DHTML. This essentially allowed us to convert websites into full applications. And now all you have to do is simply type in a URL, and immediately you are presented with a full application that you can use and interact with. No installation, which is fantastic. It's really easy. So we took CS and Java. This is how all web pages are done today now. It becomes so standard and prevalent. CSS and JavaScript are used to create DHTML. Now, Zach says DHTML absolutely stands for distributed HTML. I always kind of thought it stood for dynamic HTML. Maybe it does. Let's find out what's on the wiki. Okay, yeah, dynamic hypertext markup language, dynamic HTML. And this was the beginning of the modern web now. It brought with it all this explosion of needs and new features and capabilities that we needed to add into browsers so that way we could build these applications. And then on top of it, we got all these frameworks like jQuery, which became so commonplace that you would see it on every single website, and then web browsers just started directly adding the jQuery style APIs embedded into the framework of the browser itself. So now you don't need jQuery anymore to get that level of capabilities. Browsers just come with that capability baked in. In the 90s, as a web developer, you'd have a whole bunch of problems to run into. So they're like browsers. There were a lot of browsers, right? You had Mozilla, you had Internet Explorer, you had Netscape, and you had Opera. There probably were others, and there wasn't really a standard. No one really standardized one. Everyone kind of used a little bit different one. But the browsers, they were not compatible. So you would always have to write all this extra for each browser platform. There was one that was the best though among all the others. It actually was Internet Explorer, Microsoft's web browser. It had all the capabilities that you need, and it worked consistently-ish, as consistent as it could work. It was also fairly standardized, as most PCs included Internet Explorer as a default when you received your computer. A very common trick, if you remember. We had all these animated GIFs. The idea was, hey, instead of building all this code and extra workaround for every single different browser, because they were all different and they all had edge cases, just use Internet Explorer. Use this website with Internet Explorer. And we had these badges that said this website works best with Internet Explorer. I remember it was so cool. It was like advertisement, except there was no money exchanged. It was just, hey, use this browser, it's the best browser. We don't see this kind of advertisement as much anymore. We don't see like use this or use that unless it's a paid advertisement. This is like the beginning of the visual web. It's like the post internet, when the internet was exploding. It was kind of cool in the good old days. We had all these tricks to get the applications and displays to look really good, and you could even get it to work fantastic across all the browsers, and all these tricks that you had to know that no longer are needed at all. It's just this entire set of knowledge that we just throw away. We don't need it anymore. Just that skill set is gone. It's not needed. You don't need those skills anymore because you've got a whole bunch of other things that you can lean on these days, such as the browser frameworks and the standardization of the web. The W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, and all the web browsers. Yeah, I guess no one's obviously it's not legally enforced. Though in order to sort of fit in, you need to have the capabilities, and the way developers can leverage those capabilities need to be uniform. So our lives definitely did get easier as we standardized the web, not only for developers, but for users too.